initiating a thoughtful. That was good.
You're provoking.
Conversation.
You're provoking. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Today we're learning about Reishis, Goyim, Amalek. I thought you had 80 people coming here this morning after your announcement last night.
We heard what happened yesterday, so that's why. Sure.
Okay, so
No, you were all in the kitchen.
we're learning the end of all anti-Semites. It's a discourse by the Friedrich Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, a man of great genius, the spiritual leader of the previous generation, the generation that endured the Holocaust. And these discourses were taught during the Holocaust from Brooklyn, New York in 1943. So we're on page 382. And where I'm going today is into a beautiful dive into a very practical application of understanding the inner conflict that rages within our hearts. The premise of the discourse is quite startling. The premise of the discourse says that anti-Semitism around us, in the world around us, is a projection of anti-Semitism the way it rages within us. So, hatred of the truth in the macro universe, in the macro world, is a projection of rejection of the truth within us. There's a war within us. We have two souls. We have a godly soul and a natural soul. These two souls are constantly in battle with each other. The godly soul is the soul of truth. And the animal soul, the natural soul, is the soul of selfishness. It wants to self-serve. So it's opposed to godliness. It's an anti-God. It's an anti-Semite. When we can find equilibrium, find the courage to make a balance within us, it's then that when we can tame the anti-Semite within us, then we're able to tame the anti-Semite outside of us. And that's quite an amazing premise that this discourse is laying out, which many people might dismiss as flippant, shallow, superficial, out of touch, and other words that are less kind than the adjectives that I just used, right? Give an example. A lady approached me the other day, and she said, Rabbi, I hope you're not going to be upset with me with the criticism that I'm about to tell you. Will you? I said, I don't know.
Perhaps.
She says, Rabbi, you're out of touch because in all of your writings, you write about how we have to later fill in. I don't understand how changing my mezuzahs is going to solve the war in Israel. You have to. I'm like, what do you want me to do? You have to tell us to write to congressmen. You're a very influential man. You have to tell us to go to rallies and demonstrations and so on and so forth. So I said to her, listen. There are other organizations that do that. That is very important. Yes, of course, it's important to have demonstrations. In fact, the Talmud quotes a source, and I mentioned this on Shabbos, that you are actually supposed to make demonstrations public demonstrations against, forces that are trying to be anti-Semitic. But there are other organizations that are doing that, right? The federations and the APACs and the ZOAs and the FIDFs and those kind of organizations. Now, if I'm the only one doing the spiritual work, that's my role as the Chabad rabbi. If I'm going to do their work, then who's going to do my work? And eventually she came around. But by the way, my article this past Friday, when I wrote about the mezuzahs, and I wrote about the 105 school children that were held hostage in Israel. I'm not sure if you saw that article. Right. They were held hostage in Israel in 1974, I think it was. They, and that amazing story about how the scrolls, the 22 school children that were killed, the Rebbe mentioned that there was 22 scrolls that were not kosher. And a friend of yours, in his 90s, right, was pretty upset about the article. Him and there were others. It was published in a newspaper in Israel, and they were also. I got some comments over there. I don't understand why it would be that a mezuzah is even important. How can you possibly say that a mezuzah is somehow related to the death of these children? Now, if a person truly read the article, that's not what I said. I didn't say there was a punishment, God forbid. I said it was a consequence, that the mezuzah is the protection, right? The mezuzah is the protection that was broken. There were 22 holes in the armor, in the bulletproof vest. There was 22 windows that were not bulletproof windows. So it's not a punishment. It's just a consequence of having non-armored windows, right? And I said to this person, I said, would you feel more comfortable if I said to you the 22 school children died because the alarm system was broken. If the alarm system was, would you accept that?
Yeah.
It's not a punishment because you didn't pay your bill for the alarm system. It's just that it was a consequence. The alarm system wasn't working. That's why they weren't intercepted. Right. So he said that I can relate to, but the mezuzah is a baba maisa. That's what he tells me. Right. He used the term, a black magic term. It was like, this is not right here. What we're about to discover is the two different approaches of viewing reality. How both of these are real views. My view and the view that says, Rabbi, you don't know what you're talking about. You're out of touch. And we're going to actually present them within the theater of war, the ground zero that is not in Gaza, but the ground zero that's inside of ourselves. What he's about to say is like this. He's about to introduce the doctrine of perpetual creation, which we've spoken about many times. I'm going to summarize it very briefly. The doctrine of perpetual creation, actually, Winston just posted the blog in Times of Israel where the comments, there were some comments there that weren't so flattering. This is why I've walked away from rabbinic Judaism, says one guy, because of this Baba Maisa that the mezuzah protects. Where does this idea come from that the mezuzah protects? I mean, habits come from the Torah, right? I don't believe in the Torah. Okay, well, that's not rabbinic Judaism that you got a problem with. It's the Torah Judaism you got a problem with, right? But
I go with it. It's more common than I'd like to think. That's normal thinking these days.
But most people, so in general Judaism, think the mezuzah is the box.
right, and by the way, that point is where I'm going to right now. I'm going to go to that point in just a moment. So just bear that thought in mind. I want to make sure I address that before I'm done here. So the doctrine of perpetual creation is like this. It says that it's an X-ray vision analysis into existence, into everything that exists. So let's take a Maserati, right? A symbol of success, right? Status symbol. A Maserati. You know the story with the mezuzah and the Maserati, right? True story, this one. When I first moved to Palm Beach, we had a guy who was he was a Reform Jew, and he was a realtor. He helped us buy this building. So he says to me, Rabbi, he says there was a guy, he bought himself a Maserati. And he comes to his Reform rabbi. No, he comes to his Orthodox rabbi to ask him for a bracha for his Maserati. I said, 1 second, Michael, what's a Maserati? I didn't know. He says, Rabbi, you just ruined the punchline. I'm like, I'm sorry, but I don't know what a Maserati is. So he says, it's a fancy car. Just listen with me, okay? It's a fancy car. It's an expensive car. He says, the guy says the Orthodox rabbi, and he asks him for a bracha for his Maserati. So the Orthodox rabbi says, what's a Maserati? Right? So he goes to his conservative rabbi, same thing. Conservative rabbi says, what's a Maserati? Then he goes to his Reform rabbi, and he asks him for a bracha for his Maserati. You're talking to a Jewish crowd. No, they know how to say the joke better than you, right? Right, there you go. So he goes to his Reform rabbi, and he says, maybe he'll be able to help me. I need a bracha for my Maserati. The Reform rabbi says, what's a bracha? So, anyways, back to the Maserati, right? Okay, so here we are in the Maserati, and let's talk about the Maserati. We're doing X-ray vision on this Maserati, right? So what is Maserati? So you think that it's a car, it's an expensive car, status symbol means you're successful. But if you go deep down and you break it down into its parts, it's made out of metals and aluminum and I don't know, some other plastics and who knows what, which are raw materials that originate from where? From the universe. They come from the world. But where do they come from? They were created by God, right? Now, what were they before they were created? They were nothing. They were non-existence, right? They were not. They were nothing. They were in Hebrew we say ayin, which means nothing. And from nothing, the Torah tells us, God created the something of the world. In Latin, it's ex nihilo, out of nothing. From nothing, God created something. Now, the nature of everything in the universe is to return to its most natural state of being, right? So a natural state of being is this. You throw a rock up in the air, it wants to go down. Why does it go up? Goes up because you got energy into it. You got a powerful force pushing it upwards higher than the downward force of gravity. It's going to go up until it runs out of energy, and then it's going to come down. Everything wants to return to its natural state of being. You stretch an elastic band, it's going to stay taut until you let go, and then it's go back to its natural state of being. Everything wants to go to a state of rest. Nothing wants to be in perpetual motion. Therefore, if you take nothing, you turn into something, what does that mean? It means that the something wants to turn back into nothing. What is preventing it from turning back into nothing? Just like the rock that continues to defy its nature and to move upward. Why does it go upward? Because of an external force that's invested into it. The upward force that keeps on moving it upwards. So too, the reason why the universe, the Maserati, the metals of the Maserati continue to exist and not revert back to a state of nothing is only because there's an external force that continues to create them, that prevents them from returning back to their state of nothing, which is their natural default. What is that external force that continues to create them at every single moment in time? That is the continuous acts of creation. We say this every single day in our prayers, not once, but twice in our morning prayers, right? I'll show it to you quickly. Sure, no problem. So here's what we say. In the right after Baruch Hu, in page 39, it says Hamachadesh. Yeah, what?
Yeah, no, I was
In mercy gives light to the earth and to those who dwell thereon, and in his goodness he renews each day continuously the work of creation. That's what we say every single morning, right after Baruch Hu. And in his goodness, he renews each day continuously the work of creation. Because if God was to create the world 5,784 years ago, and he would have then gone on vacation, stopped to create the world, then the world would have gone back to a state of nothingness. The reason why the world continues to stay in the state that it's in is because God is continuously renewing the act of creation at every single moment in time. And if that's not enough to sink in, on 2 pages later, on page 41, when we sing Lakel Baruch Neimat Yiteinu LaMelech El Chai V'Kayam, we say there too, give thanks to him. No, we say he is awesome in praise, master of wonders, who in his goodness renews each day continuously the work of creation. Twice. Now, let me finish one. Now, this is the reason why you have to daven slowly. You can't say this fast. If you say this fast, how the heck is it going to seep in? How's it going to go from academic to applied? For that, you need to daven. And when we go, the nigun helps us to reflect, to meditate, to marinate on the idea, to allow it to seep in. Because remember, the distance, the journey from Bina to Das, from academic to personal to applied, in the intellectual processing of an idea, happens through meditation, through focused thinking. And when you keep on your thinking focused on one idea, it becomes felt in your heart. So this is what's called the doctrine of perpetual creation. That if not that God was creating the Maserati at every single moment in time all over again, the Maserati wouldn't be here. Yes, Mickey?
But just take what you just said. He's creating it over and over again. By creating over and over again, it means it's going back in the circle of not being there. So it's not there. It's going to nothing. In order to create, you have to start from a
Fair enough.
Zero and go up.
Fair enough. So what's the problem?
Well, the problem is that's not.
It's instantaneous.
What he says is that there is destruction before there is creation.
No, well, is there destruction or is it continue? Hashem keeping it
That's the
going?
thing. No,
Is
he's saying
Hashem
it's not
preventing it from
continuation.
going back to? You're saying
Mickey,
Hashem is
Mickey,
preventing
let me say this. I'm going to allow you to meditate on that. I'm serious. I'm going to allow you to meditate on that. Whether it reverts back to nothing or it's just being maintained. I'm going to give you an example.
Yeah, it's easier to-
Give an example of an example.
Maintain
Mickey, let me just
that.
answer your question. Of a television screen.
Yeah.
You have a television screen. You see the image on the screen. It's all there, right? But what would happen if you pulled the plug? What would happen? In an instant, it would be gone. So it looks like it's all real, right? But if it's not that the image is being created at every single moment in time through the electric plug, the flow of energy, there'll be nothing there. So I'm going to let you use that as an analogy to reflect about it, because I'm not going to answer that question right now. It's a deep dive into application and understanding. It's something to reflect upon. This is the doctrine of perpetual creation.
Can I try another example?
Yeah.
I think scientists confirm this when they determine that the universe is continually expanding.
And
So-
continually contract, and then
Well,
expansion and contraction at the same
Right.
time.
So isn't that
That would be an amazing manifestation of continuous creation. I give another manifestation of continuous creation. Remember we said nothing ever wants to continuously move. It wants to return to a state of nothingness. There's one exception to that. There's one thing that's always moving, and scientists don't understand why. It's the electron. It's always in motion. They don't understand what it is. I asked an MIT scientist in our shul. I said, how do you explain the constant motion of the electron? What does science have to say about this? Now, he's well versed in the study of Chassidus as well. I said to him, would this be the corollary of the doctrine of perpetual creation? That there's energy constantly being infused at the very core, at the very belly of the beast? He says it's exactly what it is. It's only way.
Being infused to keep it going as opposed to
Right. So whether you do maintenance, whether it's creation all over again, these are questions of Mickey. That's an interesting question.
In physics, it's entropy, we call that. So
Entropy means what?
entropy is basically the tendency to go to no energy, to
That's to return to nothing. That's what I'm talking about, right? Entropy, good word. Fantastic. So let me just wrap this up by saying the following. So now that we've introduced the doctrine of perpetual creation, there's two ways to look at the Maserati. There's the superficial way of looking at the Maserati, which is car, wealth, ego. Or you can look at the Maserati and see, OMG, you see God in the Maserati. You literally see God in the Maserati, because this thing couldn't possibly exist if not that God was creating it every time. The question is only, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's in the power of the perceiver. What do you see? If you see a status symbol that reflects on my power and influence, or do you see deeper? You have an X-ray vision that sees the power of God Almighty creating this, which the former leads you to a state of ego. The latter brings you to a state of humility. It's these two approaches to the exact same car, which is the conflict between the two souls, the godly soul and the natural soul. Now, we've learned in Tanya chapter 1 that the natural soul is originated where? It originates in Klipa, which is a superficial, Klipa means a shell or a peel. It's the superficial energy of God, the external energy of God, which is why the natural soul originating in its soul roots, being in Klipa, means it's always drawn to external perceptions because it comes from an external energy of God. That's why we normal human beings are so influenced by marketing. We're so influenced by marketing. Whether the Coca-Cola is good for you or bad for you doesn't really matter as much as how many billions they're investing into marketing. That's what's going to determine if the product is going to sell. We're influenced by the presentation of the product, not by the content of the product. We'll eat the food even if it's not healthy for us, just because it looks good.
Perception is more important than reality.
Only when you're motivated by your natural soul, Mickey. Only when that's your natural soul's. When you're in the gear of the natural soul, you're influenced by your external perception, because it's not by any fault of your natural soul. You're just a soul that is rooted in superficiality, and that's why you're influenced by superficiality, right? And that's why when the natural soul sees a Maserati, what does he see? He sees a status symbol. He doesn't see deeper beyond the surface because he's a superficial being. The godly soul in Tanya chapter 2 is rooted where? In the essence of godliness. Deep, deep, deep on the inside. That's where the godly soul comes from. So the godly soul sees right through all of these Baba propaganda, marketing. It's all nonsense. The godly soul sees truth. And that's why when the godly soul, when you're in the gear of the godly soul, when you look at the Maserati, you don't see the status symbol and the ego-producing status symbol. You see the humility-inducing perpetual creation. I'm going back to the mezuzah now for a moment. Now that we understand that you got two energies within you, the godly soul and the animal soul, you got the Semite and the anti-Semite, right? So now there's two ways of looking at reality. You can look at the mezuzah as a silly idiosyncrasy at worst, or maybe at best as some sentimental cultural tradition, both of which have no bearing on reality whatsoever, right? This is the approach, the illusionary approach of the animal soul, the natural soul. The godly soul says, one second, perpetual creation is at play all the time, right? Who's in charge of Hamas? in today's Tehillim, at the very end of today's Tehillim, it says, Me'ish Hamas Tatzileni, save me from the man of Hamas. That's exactly what it says in the second last verse of today's Tehillim. Who's creating Hamas at every single moment in time? Doctrine of Perpetual Creation, that's Hashem, the Eibishter. Who's creating Hezbollah, Nasrallah, and the others? Well, the Houthis and the Tutsis and the other enemies that we're learning of that we never knew existed, right? Houthis, yeah, but these other guys in Yemen, they're Houthis, I think. No? Houthis. It's the HOU. It's a different kind. It's not the HU. Whatever. Right. So who's creating these entities? Who's creating the RPG, the grenade? Who's creating the missile, the incoming missile? It's the doctrine of perpetual creation. The godly soul. It's all from Hashem. Per force, the mezuzah is meaningful because the same God that created the RPG and the missile is the same God that tells us in the Torah that He wrote that mezuzah brings you protection. That tefillin brings you deterrence from the enemies. That studying of Torah above your pay grade will bring peace upon the land. This is what it says in the Torah, the same Torah of the God that creates the world at every single moment of time. These are two gears of perception. When you're in the gear of the godly soul, you see straight through to the X-ray, down to the microscopic subatomic material. When you're in the animal soul mode, you don't see that. So with this perception, and by the way, Marty, back to your point about the mezuzah, so it's beautifully manifest about those people, many Jews, who look at the scroll of the mezuzah as like an unnecessary, illegible. Yeah, it's illegible directions that they discarded. They don't even know what it is. But to them, the mezuzah is a case. It's having a pretty case on my doorway. Right. That's not what it's at. It looks like a mezuzah, feels like a mezuzah, but it's not a mezuzah. It's just a case. Right? It's like saying, I have a car. It doesn't need a battery. It doesn't need seats. It doesn't need a steering wheel, but it looks like a car, so I'm good. Who in their right mind would talk like that? Nobody would talk like that. But it's just that when it comes to spirituality, we discount it as some useless.
But doesn't that beg the question that why would God want to create Hamas?
Yeah, for sure it does.
Day after day.
Okay, so let me.
Why would he want to create basically evil in the world?
If you were
Back to the serpent. Are we back to the serpent?
Yeah, we are absolutely.
If you accept the concept of perpetual motion, you accept the concept that the same Hashem that makes the mezuzah makes the RPG goes to Harvey's question.
Okay.
Why?
So now we have a question. Now we have a very good question. So we're covering ground. This is a very good question to have. And we say, for Nakasha Shtabrenisht, nobody ever died from a question. So here's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say this. What we learned today was outside of the text. God willing, on Tuesday, next week, we'll carry on this idea inside the text. But how it ties into anti-Semitism, just for a moment before I get to your answer, is that when we can vanquish anti-Semitism within ourselves, which is to overcome that superficial perception of reality and to choose to see the doctrine of perpetual creation in every single encounter and experience. How that manifests is in fear. Where there is fear, there's superficiality. Where there is faith, where there's no fear, it means that you see through to the core. You know that Hashem is always with me wherever I am. This is the litmus test of which one you are, faith or fear, right? Now, with that introduction, we understand, okay, so in the world around us, this is why there's anti-Semitism raging, and why the Frierdiker Rebbe says elsewhere in another place, he says in the morning, don't wake up and read the news. He says, wake up and make the news. Don't find out what's happening with the war. Make the news, because when you vanquish your evil inclination within you, your superficiality within you, and you choose to see the doctrine of perpetual creation in every experience, and you choose to remove fear from your heart, to root it out of your heart, then what you've done is you vanquished anti-Semitism within, and that will make the news in the world outside of you. Now, to answer your question, Harvey, so I'm just going to say this. So why does God do that? Again, it's all in the Torah. He tells us there's going to be anti-Semitism, and I wrote this to someone else, another person that was upset with me. I know that I'm making a difference. I know that I'm making a difference when I'm stirring up people's emotions. I said to him, listen, because the guy wrote to me yesterday. He saw my article in this local newspaper, Jewish Journal, here with my 15 questions, and he says, Rabbi, your historical facts are amazing until you went to this religion, hocus pocus stuff, and then you lost me. So we engaging back and forth, and he says to me, he's like, I don't believe in a God that would allow Hamas to do this. So I said to him, listen, he told us that it's going to happen. He told us 3,500 years ago. He says to Abraham, your children will suffer in a faraway land. For 400 years, they're going to be persecuted, but they'll survive. And we know this about every anti-Semite we're ever going to face. We're going to outlive them. So that's a pretty good deal. When God says, listen, it's going to be rough. Why is it going to be rough? That's for another topic. That's another conversation. Why does God want us to suffer? I'm going to give you in a nutshell. The reason why you squeeze the olive is to bring out the oil. Without the squeezing, you'll never bring out the oil. Without pressure, we would never bring out the best in us. Yes, exactly. To bring out teshuvah. That's exactly the point of what we're saying over here. If not that you had pressure in your life, you would not have made the greatest decisions that you ever made. You would never have brought out your deepest talents that you never knew even that you had. Right? That's in a nutshell. But I said to this guy, that's a pretty. You remember Babe Ruth when he was out there and he pointed. It's one thing to hit the home run, but it's another thing to say there and then to hit it there. That's what God does. He says your children will survive and outlive all their enemies. That's what he says. And then they do it. Now you can't tell me, well, I don't like this God. Okay, so you don't agree with the God, that's fine. But to say that he's not strong, that he's not in control, that means he knows exactly what he's doing. Let's just wrap it up with some comments coming in here. I wanted to give a shout out to my beautiful daughter who's 2 days ago went to the rally in Washington. So proud of her being so brave. Awesome. Downward force is more powerful. Downward force is more powerful than the upward force, meaning the material is more obvious than the void nature form of material. And form is more obvious. Form is more obvious than formlessness nature. Okay, whatever.
Downward force means that there is no-
Father Rabbi, you had the second of the stillness and movement of. Okay, I'm not going to get into this right now. If God had not called me, I'd probably be watching bad TV and smoking myself to death right now. Well, Gib, I'm glad that you're with us. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap it up over here. Lots to do today. Have a great day, everybody. Please make sure, folks, apply the doctrine of perpetual creation. Have no fear. See the creative hand of God in every single part of your life, including your physical body, and you'll see no fear in your life.